What if the most powerful pharmacy in human history wasn't a building? It was a garden, a hillside, a kitchen shelf. For thousands of years, before prescriptions, before insurance forms, before anyone in a white coat decided what you were allowed to take, people healed themselves. Not with guesswork, with plants they had tested on their own bodies, across hundreds of generations, with no margin for error. These weren't remedies born from desperation. They were refined, documented, passed down like scripture, because in many cases they were scripture. The book of Ezekiel described trees whose leaves were for healing. The book of Revelation echoed it, word for word. People who dismiss that as poetry have never looked at what those trees actually contain. Today we're going through 10 of those herbs, plants used by healers before pharmacies existed, before the word antibiotic had ever been spoken. And modern research hasn't disproved them. It's confirmed them, one by one. Stay with me, because number 4 on this list was considered so medically significant that ancient physicians cataloged it across more than 20 separate preparations. And yet today, you probably walk past it in the grocery store without a second thought. And number 1, the one we're building toward, has been found in clinical studies to outperform a commonly prescribed class of drugs for a specific condition without the side effects. It's been in continuous use for over 4,000 years. And there's a very specific reason it disappeared from Western medicine in the 20th century that has nothing to do with whether it works. If this is the kind of knowledge you want more of, old things, true things, things that work, hit subscribe before we begin. New videos every week. Let's start. Number 10, hyssop. Most people know hyssop, if they know it at all, as a minor footnote, a plant mentioned in Psalm 51, where David writes, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." It's treated as poetic language, spiritual metaphor. But here's what changes everything. Hyssop wasn't chosen for that line because it sounded beautiful. It was chosen because every person reading it in that moment knew exactly what hyssop did. In the ancient world, hyssop was the cleansing herb, the purification herb. It appears in Exodus, used specifically in the ritual preparation that protected Israelite homes during the Passover. It appears in Numbers in the purification rites for people who had contact with the dead. Every single time, the function is the same. Hyssop cleanses what is contaminated. That's not metaphor. That's medicine described in ritual language. Hyssop contains carvacrol and thymol, the same antimicrobial compounds found in oregano and thyme. When modern researchers tested hyssop extract against a panel of bacterial strains, it demonstrated meaningful inhibitory activity against several pathogens, including Staphylococcus. The plant the ancients used to cleanse contamination contains compounds that actually kill certain bacteria on contact. It also contains rosmarinic acid, a potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compound now being studied for its effect on respiratory inflammation, which explains why medieval herbalists used it specifically for coughs, chest congestion, and what they called putrid lung conditions. Why isn't hyssop on every supplement shelf? Because it's cheap, grows wild across the Mediterranean, and no pharmaceutical company has ever managed to synthesize what makes it work in a form they could patent and sell at a margin. Make hyssop tea. Steep the dried leaves in just boiled water for 10 minutes. It's slightly bitter, slightly minty. It was the taste of medicine for 3,000 years. Number 9, wormwood. This one has a complicated reputation, and that reputation is mostly wrong. Mention wormwood to most people, and they think of absinthe, the infamous liqueur, the drink that was blamed with very little actual evidence for madness, hallucinations, and moral ruin across 19th century Europe. Wormwood was banned, vilified, removed from the category of medicine entirely. But wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, had been in continuous medical use for at least 2,000 years before that particular panic. And the thing that was blamed for absence effects wasn't the wormwood. It was the alcohol. Hippocrates documented it for jaundice, menstrual pain, and anemia. The ancient Egyptians used it as a digestive tonic and intestinal treatment. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the community medical text found at Qumran, wormwood appears as a treatment for what appears to be parasitic infection. Here's what the plant actually contains. artemisinin, a compound extracted from a closely related species, Artemisia annua, that became the basis for the most effective anti-malarial drug currently used by the World Health Organization. The 2015 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to the researcher who identified it. That Nobel Prize was essentially awarded for rediscovering what Chinese traditional physicians had documented in the 4th century. The wormwood species used traditionally also contains absinthin and artabsin, bitter compounds called sesquiterpene lactones that stimulate bile production, improve fat digestion, and have demonstrated antiparasitic activity in laboratory settings. Wormwood tea is intensely bitter. That bitterness isn't a flaw. Bitterness is how the liver knows help has arrived. A note here, because it matters. Concentrated wormwood essential oil is not safe for consumption. The plant, as a prepared tea or tincture, used the way it was traditionally used, is different from the concentrated isolates. One honest warning in a video like this makes everything else more credible, and this is the warning worth making. Number 8. Frankincense boswellia. Why frankincense? Why was this resin considered worthy to be brought before a king of kings alongside gold and myrrh? 3 gifts. One was a metal, one was medicine, one was this. The ancient answer: frankincense was worth more than currency. It was medicine, spiritual practice, and trade commodity simultaneously. Caravans crossed hundreds of miles of desert to carry it. Wars were fought over the routes it traveled. The modern answer is more precise. Boswellia serrata, the tree that produces frankincense, contains compounds called boswellic acids. Specifically, AKBA, acetyl 11-keto beta boswellic acid. Clinical trials, not observational studies, actual randomized controlled trials, have found that boswellic acids inhibit a specific enzyme called 5-lipoxygenase, which sits directly in the pathway that produces leukotrienes, the inflammatory molecules responsible for joint swelling, airway inflammation, and certain forms of gut inflammation. In multiple peer-reviewed trials, boswellia extract significantly reduced symptoms in patients with osteoarthritis of the knee. In some studies, the reduction in pain and improvement in function was comparable to standard anti-inflammatory drugs, without the gastrointestinal side effects that make long-term NSAID use problematic. The ancients burned it. They breathed it. They applied it as resin. They consumed it in preparation. Every method of delivery was a slightly different treatment. They just didn't have the language to explain why. What they had was 4,000 years of feedback. High-quality boswellia extract, standardized to contain at least 65% boswellic acids, is now widely available. The gap between a good extract and a cheap one is significant. The active acid content varies enormously between products. A gift for a king, and modern rheumatology is only now catching up to why. Number 7. Fenugreek. Here's a detail that stops most people when they hear it for the first time. The ancient Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents on Earth, written approximately 1550 BCE, contains more than 800 remedies. Fenugreek appears in over a dozen of them. For burns, for fever, for swelling, as a uterine tonic after childbirth, as a treatment for what the scribes described as hardening of the vessels. Hardening of the vessels. That's atherosclerosis. That's arterial plaque, written in Egypt. In 1550 BCE, fenugreek seeds contain a specific soluble fiber called galactomannan and steroidal saponins, compounds that have demonstrated in multiple human clinical trials the ability to slow the absorption of glucose in the gut, reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes, and lower LDL cholesterol in subjects with elevated levels. The mechanism isn't theoretical. It's been measured in double-blind studies. Across the world, without any connection to Egypt, fenugreek appears in Ayurvedic medicine, in Greek and Roman texts, in early Arabic medical manuscripts. Every ancient medical tradition that had access to this plant used it for the same cluster of conditions: digestive disorders, blood, inflammation, and what we would now call metabolic syndrome. That kind of convergence doesn't happen by accident. Soak a teaspoon of fenugreek seeds overnight in water. Eat the seeds in the morning, drink the water. That's the preparation in Ayurvedic tradition that has the most documentation behind it. It doesn't taste good. Neither does most medicine that actually works. Number 6. Elderberry. Most people know elderberry now as a trendy immune supplement. They've seen the syrup at the pharmacy, the gummies at the health food store, the expensive little bottle next to the zinc. And most people assume this is new. Elderberry, Sambucus nigra, has been in continuous use in Europe for so long that in some traditions, it was considered the entire medicine cabinet in a single plant. Hippocrates called elder his medicine chest. Medieval European peasants kept elder trees near their homes specifically for medical access. Pliny the Elder documented it. So did Dioscorides. So did nearly every significant herbalist in the Western tradition between ancient Greece and the Industrial Revolution. Here's what changed. The pharmaceutical industry found something more profitable. Elderberry couldn't be patented, couldn't be synthesized, couldn't be turned into an exclusive product with a margin. So it became a folk remedy, something grandmothers made, something that wasn't real medicine. Except a 2016 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in Nutrients found that elderberry supplementation reduced the duration of cold symptoms by an average of 2 days and symptom severity significantly compared to placebo. A 2019 meta-analysis confirmed the finding across 4 separate studies. The active mechanism involves anthocyanins, specifically cyanidin 3, glucoside, and cyanidin 3, sambubioside, which have demonstrated direct antiviral activity in vitro, interfering with viral replication and stimulating cytokine production in immune cells. 2 important things. The berries must be cooked. Raw elderberries contain a cyanogenic glycoside that causes nausea. Every traditional preparation cooked them, not because they knew about cyanogenic glycosides, but because they learned. That's what generations of feedback produces. And the flowers, elder flowers, have a separate and equally documented history as an anti-inflammatory and fever-breaking preparation. Same plant, different part, different medicine. Number 5, calendula. There is a wound-healing herb that appears in the oldest surviving medical texts of the ancient world, in Egyptian records, in the Roman military medical corpus, in every major European herbal from the medieval period through the 17th century. Soldiers used it on the battlefield. Midwives used it. Monks grew it in their apothecary gardens because they had no substitute for what it did. Then photography was invented, and this herb became famous for its color. Calendula officinalis, the pot marigold, produces one of the most vivid orange flowers in the plant kingdom. By the 18th and 19th centuries, it was everywhere in ornamental gardens. It was in wallpaper patterns. It was a decorative thing. Its medical identity was slowly buried under the weight of its beauty. Here's what the monks knew that the wallpaper designers forgot. Calendula contains flavonoids, particularly isoramnitin and narcissin, along with triterpenoids and oleanolic acid derivatives, compounds that accelerate tissue granulation, reduce local inflammation, and demonstrate measurable antimicrobial activity against Staphylococcus aureus and Candida albicans. Multiple clinical trials, including a randomized trial published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, found calendula cream significantly superior to trolamine, a standard pharmaceutical preparation, in preventing acute dermatitis in breast cancer patients undergoing radiation therapy. It healed skin that was being deliberately damaged by radiation, and it outperformed the pharmaceutical alternative. Make a calendula-infused oil. Pack dried calendula flowers tightly into a jar, cover completely with olive oil, seal it, and leave it in a warm spot for 4 to 6 weeks. Strain it. Apply it to any wound, burn, rash, or irritated skin you encounter. That's the preparation that has existed essentially unchanged for 2,000 years. This plant grew in the monastery garden. It healed the monks. It can heal your skin right now. It has been waiting. Number 4, myrrh. In John 19, verse 39, Nicodemus brings a mixture of myrrh and aloes for the burial preparation of Jesus, approximately 75 pounds of it. In the culture and context of that moment, 75 pounds of myrrh was not a sentimental gesture. It was the equivalent of arriving with a significant fortune. Because in the ancient world, myrrh was medicine. Not medicine as we use the word now, something prescribed for a specific condition and then discarded. Myrrh was comprehensive medicine. The Egyptians cataloged it in more than 20 separate medical preparations. For wounds, for infections, for oral health, for uterine conditions, as a component in embalming, which was not only ritual but preservation, requiring compounds with genuine antimicrobial activity. The active compounds in myrrh resin are sesquiterpenes, particularly curzarine, furanidesma, 1,3-diene, and lindestrine, along with a class of compounds called furanosesquiterpenoids. These have demonstrated in laboratory testing genuine antibacterial activity against a range of strains, antifungal properties, and, specifically, direct activity against oral pathogens. Multiple clinical trials have found myrrh extract effective against oral mucositis, gum disease, and certain forms of dental infection. A standardized myrrh tincture used as a mouth rinse showed statistically significant reduction in gingivitis scores in a double-blind trial. The ancient world used it on wounds because it was one of the few things available that could prevent infection. They didn't know what a bacterium was, but they knew that wounds treated with myrrh healed, and wounds that weren't treated with myrrh often didn't. That's the scientific method, just running over centuries instead of months. Myrrh is available today as a standardized resin tincture. Mix a few drops in water and use it as a mouth rinse. Your ancient ancestors would recognize exactly what you're doing. They'd also wonder why you waited so long. Number 3, turmeric. Every major ancient healing tradition on Earth, without coordination, without communication, arrived at this root. Ayurvedic medicine has a documented history of turmeric use spanning 4,000 years. Traditional Chinese medicine cataloged it separately and independently. Ancient Egyptian physicians used it. Greek and Roman texts mention it. It crosses the entire breadth of ancient civilization, and every tradition found it for the same cluster of conditions: inflammation, liver function, digestion, and pain. When you see that kind of convergence, cultures with no contact using the same plant for the same conditions across the same 4,000-year span, that is not coincidence. That is a signal. The compound responsible is curcumin, diferrylylmethane. It's been the subject of more than 12,000 published studies, more than almost any other naturally occurring compound. It inhibits NF-kappa B, one of the master switches for inflammatory gene expression. It modulates COX-2 enzymes, the same pathway targeted by ibuprofen and naproxen. In some head-to-head studies, curcumin has matched anti-inflammatory drug performance for osteoarthritis pain with significantly fewer gastrointestinal side effects. There's one crucial problem. Raw curcumin is poorly absorbed. Your gut doesn't take it up efficiently on its own. Here's the part that makes this extraordinary. Traditional turmeric preparations, across both Ayurvedic and South Asian culinary traditions, almost always combine turmeric with black pepper. Black pepper contains piperine, a compound that increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000% in human subjects. Not 20%, not 200%, 2,000%. These traditions figured out the bioavailability problem without chromatography, without clinical trials, through thousands of years of paying attention to what worked. Modern science didn't discover that. It confirmed it. There's a difference. Add a teaspoon of turmeric and a generous pinch of black pepper to warm milk, to olive oil, to a morning drink. The black pepper isn't optional. It never was. Number 2, garlic. Garlic appears in the Ebers Papyrus, the same 1550 BCE Egyptian medical text that documented fenugreek. It appears as a treatment for more than 20 separate conditions, including headache, bites, worms, heart disorders, and tumors. It was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. More significantly, it was found in the worker settlements of the Great Pyramid construction sites. Tablets recording food rations for laborers explicitly include garlic as a required daily provision. Not a luxury, a requirement. The logic was medical. These workers were doing hard physical labor in conditions where infection was a constant risk. Garlic was prophylactic medicine, administered through food. The Roman military physician Dioscorides documented garlic as a treatment for infection and intestinal parasites. Medieval plague physicians, who had remarkably few tools at their disposal, used garlic as a primary intervention. The mechanism is allicin, a sulfur compound produced when garlic is crushed or chopped, and the enzyme alliinase converts alliin. Allicin is one of the most studied antimicrobial compounds in the natural world. It demonstrates direct activity against MRS, a methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, one of the most dangerous antibiotic-resistant bacteria in modern hospitals. In vitro studies have found allicin effective against E. coli, Salmonella, Pseudomonas, and Candida species. Beyond antimicrobial activity, multiple meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials have found garlic supplementation produces statistically significant reductions in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. One meta-analysis covering 12 trials found average reductions of approximately 8 millimeters of mercury systolic, comparable to first-line antihypertensive medication in certain populations. Pharmaceuticals cannot patent allicin. The molecule is too simple, too old, too widely available. There is no financial incentive to conduct the kind of large-scale trials that would put garlic on a prescribing pad. One specific practice worth knowing: when you crush garlic, wait 10 minutes before cooking it. The enzymatic conversion of alliin to allicin requires approximately 10 minutes of exposure to air. High heat deactivates the enzyme almost immediately. 10 minutes of patience produces a fundamentally different medicinal product than garlic thrown straight into a hot pan. The pyramid builders knew something. We just finally understand why. Number 1, thyme. Here is a plant so ordinary, so completely absorbed into the background of Western kitchens, that its medical identity has been almost completely invisible for 200 years. It sits in a jar in your spice cabinet, possibly coated with a thin layer of dust. You reach past it to find the paprika. Thymus vulgaris was not always decorative. For most of recorded history, it was medical. The ancient Greeks burned it as incense in their temples, not for spiritual reasons alone, but because the smoke from burning thyme purified the air. The word thyme derives from the Greek thymos, meaning fumigation. They were burning an antimicrobial herb in enclosed spaces. They called it religion. We would call it infection control. Roman soldiers bathed in thyme water before battle, for courage, yes, in the mythology, but also because thyme bathing reduced the bacterial load on skin before wounds were inflicted. Medieval Europeans strewed thyme across the floors of hospitals and sick rooms. They placed sprigs under pillows to prevent nightmares, and also, though they didn't know to say it this way, to reduce airborne pathogens in sleeping spaces. The knights of the Middle Ages wore sprigs of thyme as tokens from their ladies before battle, not as romance, as protection. Everyone understood what thyme was for. Here's what it contains: thymol and carvacrol, 2 phenolic compounds that are among the most powerful naturally occurring antimicrobial agents identified to date. Thymol is the active ingredient in Listerine, not a thymol analog, not a synthetic approximation. Thymol, extracted directly from thyme or synthesized to replicate what thyme produces naturally. Listerine was introduced in 1879, originally as a surgical antiseptic. The compound it was built around had been used medically for thousands of years. The bottle just made it easier to market. Multiple randomized controlled trials have found thyme preparations effective for bronchitis and upper respiratory infection. In some German studies, thyme IV syrup outperformed pharmaceutical expectorants for cough resolution time. Germany's Commission E, the federal body that evaluates herbal medicines, has formally approved thyme for treatment of bronchitis and upper respiratory catarrh. This is a government body approving a kitchen herb because the evidence is that consistent. Thymol also demonstrates antifungal activity against Candida species, antiparasitic properties, and documented activity against oral bacteria, which is why thyme tea has been used as a mouth rinse across European folk medicine for centuries. For respiratory illness, bring water to a boil, remove from heat, add a generous handful of fresh thyme or 2 teaspoons of dry thyme. cover for 15 minutes. The covering matters. The volatile oils, which carry the thymol, evaporate. You want them in your tea, not your ceiling. Add honey. Drink it. That's the preparation used by every pre-industrial healer in the Western world for cough and chest infection. Now think about that jar in your cabinet, the one you reach past. It has been medicine for 4,000 years. You already own it. It has been waiting. The people who used these plants were not primitive. They were paying attention in a way that we, surrounded by systems designed to manage our health for us, often no longer do. They didn't have randomized controlled trials. They had something different, centuries of unbroken feedback from actual human bodies and actual conditions, with actual consequences for getting it wrong. Mistakes didn't get repeated, or got passed down. Modern science didn't discover these properties. It confirmed them. That distinction matters more than it seems, because it tells you where the knowledge actually came from. And it didn't come from a laboratory. It came from people across thousands of years, paying close attention to what happened when they used these plants. A note on quality, because it's worth being honest about. The difference between thyme tea made from the herb in your kitchen and a standardized thyme extract is real. The difference between a quality boswellia supplement with documented boswellic acid content and a cheap capsule filled with powdered resin is significant. If any of these are going to work the way the research shows, the quality of the source matters. I'll have links in the description to products I trust, not to tell you what to buy, but to show you what to look for. Here's what I want you to do this week. Choose one. Just one. Not a complete overhaul of your kitchen. One plant from this list. Make one preparation. Pay attention to what happens. That's what your ancestors did. One thing. Carefully. Over time. Which one surprised you most today? Drop it in the comments and tell me if you've already been using any of these. I'd genuinely like to know. Next week, 7 foods mentioned in the Bible that researchers are now studying for their effects on the aging brain. One of them is so specific to a particular region that most of us have never tasted it, and the data coming out of recent trials is difficult to ignore. I'll see you then.